Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Exceptional Effort Business Sunday. Today, I'm here with Ingrid and Julian. Pete is an apology. His wife's sick, so he won't be joining us today. And I'm Damien Andrews. We're talking about lowering your stress at home, how to separate work and home at home. So good morning. And yeah, this is obviously a very relevant topic given today's environment with a lot of people working at home. I mean, how important is it to separate your work and your home life while working at home?
It's immense. Oh, sorry, Julian. It's immense, and I'll give an example of how I saw this manifest in the middle of COVID, sort of early April. That wish to be outside with people other than your family, or to go for a walk, or to get exercise, and to have a break from the home environment. Was so evident. You know, there were people walking around with dogs that had probably never walked their dogs before. There were people, going down to the lake who were, clearly either elderly or somewhat unfit. They hadn't thought about, exercising like that a month earlier, and yet here we were. So under stress, I think it's a sign. It's a very obvious sign that everybody needs to create some kind of break for themselves.
Julian, you were going to say?
Definitely. Yeah, no, definitely. I think it's quite a broad question when you break it down, and I think obviously with the current COVID situation, it's really been highlighted. And over the years, whether it's 5, 10, 20 years, as email became remote and into our lives, we got these things called laptops that we used to start taking home with us depending on the position we had. And I know my daughter's 24. I remember when she was 5 months old, I was lying on the floor of a Gold Coast unit on holidays doing emails at 5 a.m. because she was awake and she just got fed. So it kind of comes into your life, which is working from home. Now, the argument of being efficient and using your downtime, but it kind of, if you don't stop it, it comes into your life, which then brings up the smartphones. Of course, we have our work in our pocket, and we all know the stories of people out at restaurants and cafes or watching kids footy. They're doing emails when in theory you should really have that balance of turning it down. And then we move into the situation where we are now, where people are encouraged to work from home because the offices are shut. And then that's the real question of, how do you distinguish between starting at 8 or 8:30 at your dedicated office space at home? And some people I know that's the kitchen table because they live flat share with a two-bedroom apartment, versus knowing when to turn that off. I think it raises a lot of questions and discipline of how you do that. And then the final thing is the expectations from bosses who, possibly pile more work onto people, and they go, shit, it's 8 o'clock at night, I'm still working. So it's a real minefield if you start breaking it down like that.
Yeah, it seems to be a lot of, I know from my perspective, I've always been, I will say bad at that, because I've always taken work with me, and I've always done things at all different hours of the day. And there was a time in my life where it did become very consuming and interfered with my private life a lot. And for me, I found that caused a lot of stress. When we're talking about that kind of stress, it does create stresses on your relationships at home. And like you're saying, Ingrid, some people we need to have break from our family as well. We all need to have that. I remember when I got married, the pastor said, make sure you keep your shed. And it's the same, I think, from the perspective, and don't want to be gender specific, that everyone has their space that they need, and wherever that is. And I found that for me, it really encroached a lot on that and created a lot of stress in my relationship. And then sometimes later with children as well, it was, become, like you say, people are at the sports and they'll be on their mobile phone instead of paying attention to their children. They're doing their work. So, and that creates stress in your life, as you were saying. And how do we balance that? What can we do to bring that back into line, and so that we do keep that balance and reduce our stress?
So Julian hit on something. It was one thing to have a laptop and bring it home and check on your work emails. And then we got to tablets, and tablets became really extra portable. So, you know, even if we were maybe traveling overseas or traveling interstate for a meeting, we pack our laptop, we bring our tablet. It's like this gradual addiction. And now they're this size, you know, and we're walking around with them, and technology, the immediacy of technology, and the pre-training that we've had over the last sort of 10, 15 years, but particularly I'd say the last 5, where text has been so light, so readily available, such a small size. You just got to be mindful, and there are more important things in life. Our relationships, our friendships, our relationships in our immediate family, the energy around that gives us positivity and will to keep going and do work. But if you damage that by doing so much work, if you cannot separate and you cannot delineate, I think that's where it's dangerous. You have to be mindful. You have to start learning some techniques that go, oh, my little radar's pinging. I haven't, I haven't talked to person X for the last 2 hours. Have got my frame off a seated position for the last 3 hours because I've been writing. You know, there are signs that and they're natural ones. You start to get restless in your own seat. You cannot be effective and efficient in writing, no matter how good you are at writing, if you don't move your body and drink water and get up and move around. So there are signs, you need to listen to them, become a little bit more aware of the people around you when you're working at home, and learn to stop. And it may not always be convenient for you. You know, you might be in a really great flow, but these are the other people that support and give you energy. Stop and look after them for a while, look after yourself.
Yeah. I think coming back to some of the disciplines, it is what it is. I mean, you can go back to the old-fashioned days where, you know, you left the office at 5:30 or 7:30 and you left your work at the office. That doesn't exist anymore. So it is what it is. But things like notifications, you know, I've turned off my email notifications so that if I, let's say you might have your phone out doing some reading a newspaper or something, you know, just because you use your devices for entertainment or social, is to not have those alerts, notifications. The other thing that I also practice is that if the family, like for me personally, my family might, you know, disappear to bed at 9 or 9:30, I'm a bit of a late person. I'll allocate that time then to do some work if I need stuff done, not at 7:30 when they're all present. So allocating your time, sometimes you do have to get things done, but don't let it become addictive. So as you said, it is a discipline, but you can use the technology to also help you implement those disciplines as well. So use it for your advantage with notifications, even alarms or reminders that pop up. If you are working 8 to 8, you say you're working, a reminder comes up, turn off laptop or something, because you can get immersed and lost in things as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Do a little Google around, but there's a few exercise-based apps, and they're with an OHS kind of bundle, and you can set alarms either on your laptop or on your phone or both. And whether you do them or not at that time when you get the reminder or not, it's up to you. But it does give you a little prompt to say, actually, I should be maybe thinking about doing something else right now.
Yeah.
Well, that's the combination of what you both said then, the signs that you mentioned, Ingrid, and the turning off notifications, Julian. That was something I really experienced. One of my signs was a few years ago, we were holidaying in Switzerland, and the apartment we were in didn't have Wi-Fi. When I got back, I had a $12,000 phone bill from a 1-month holiday. And that was a kind of a sign to go, I was probably working a little bit too much on my trip away. And the other point that I've added to that, like with Julian, like as mentioned, is turning off notifications. Literally, my phone is on silent all the time. I will not, unless I'm looking at it and the phone rings, I won't know that it even rings. And the same with emails. Even on my emails, I've turned off all the notifications. All same with social media. Everything's turned off. It doesn't even show you know, like in the app, in the icon for the email, it has a number of unread emails. I even turned that off, so I won't even know if there's unread emails there. I allocate a time that I'm going to look at it, and it's not like 10 o'clock every day. It's just in the day I'll go, okay, this is my time to look at emails. And one of the other things I've found that really helps with that to be efficient is I won't open an email unless I'm going to deal with it. Because a lot of times what you'll do, I found, well, what I did was I'd be open an email, I'd look at it, I'd read it, and I go, oh, I'll deal with that later. And I come back, and then I'd have to read the same thing, and you lose. It's an amazing amount of time that you lose by re-going over things that if you had dealt with it straight away, it just disappears. And I found by doing that, it frees up additional time. And from that perspective, I make note of, like, if I'm spending time with someone special or my son, the phone goes away. It just, I put it somewhere, wherever, like I'll go for a ride today with Benjamin and we'll go down and play tennis. The phone I'll have the phone with me, but it'll stay in my backpack. I won't be taking it out in my pocket or anything like that. And when I'm having dinner with someone, the phone goes away. And it's the same in a meeting, in a business meeting, I do the same thing. I focus on what needs to be there because my phone doesn't ring and doesn't alert me. That's a plus, it makes it easier. And I found that really helps with that balance. Even though I don't have a rigid structure going, this is my time to do things, because a lot of my days needs to be flexible. But when I sit down with someone and I'm spending that time with family, it's solely focused on them. And I found that's made a huge difference in the connection that I have with the people around me.
That's all. We all need to do that, and I think the temptation can still be there. But the other thing we were talking about before was about the stress at home and working from home, and how it's interesting as we look across different states. I think down to Victoria, I think Damien Andrews recently said the other day, stay at home, don't come to work. We've got other states that are opening up, and I know through my own clients, they've got situations where they want staff to come back to the office, and they've actually got a 50-50 mix where staff are saying, you know what, I quite like working from home. I'd like to work from home for 3 days and come to the office for 2 days. And you have other people dying to get back to the office because of the fact is they can jump on a bus, they can get in their car, and the social interaction of, people going to the office, catching up with their work colleagues, going out to have their coffee in the morning, and just that general socializing. So there's a few areas there of stress, but also being cooped up in that box at home, which is your work. And it seems to be, and this is just my gut feel, it seems to be a 50-50 split across the community of those that want to go back and that can cause stress at home for whatever the situation is or the reasons, and the ones that are saying, I really like working at home. So, as a business owner or as a company, there is a minefield there to walk, to work through of how do you bring people back? How do you get people that's desperate to come back because I can't work at home because it's stressful? And I think a lot of industries and businesses across Australia are just stepping through that. And then it brings up the whole legal HR issues of forcing people to come back that say, well, if I get corona, it's going to be your fault. So, where do you start with all that?
That's a really interesting point, Julian, because the industrialization scheme, you can see it now, has had a major shift. So now we have our, Attorney General and the head of the union movement sitting down, they're BFFs. They've gotten through the crisis period and developed a moment in time to create a different conversation. And it goes back to what I said probably a few episodes ago. It may be very stressful for employers at the moment to have those kinds of conversations, but I don't want the old norm back, and I suspect a lot of people don't want that norm back, unless they're of those types of people who know themselves well enough and know, no, I need the social contact. But to say you must come back to work is not going to work. We've tested something big. We've had a social reform happening alongside a crisis, and those conversations are going to go on for a long time. And I would say that if we don't allow them to happen freely and fully in the next, over the next couple of years, certainly in the next couple of months intensively, we will have a social, economic, and work, another IR kind of take on this in another couple of years' time, and it'll be a major one, and it may be heavily regulated. So these are the sort of black and white ends of things, but I think it's a fabulous opportunity not to do the same thing.
It's interesting that some of those discussions, as you were talking about, some people want to stay at home. That's the new, they've got a taste of that, they like it. Other people don't like being cooped up at home. Well, maybe cooped up's not the right word, but they want to get back to that social interaction. And I know with some of my clients, and they range in value. One of the clients, they're doing billion-dollar projects, and they've done the main office has been shut for a long time. Everyone's been working from home, and they've gone through and they've done a number of surveys to find out who wants to come back to the office and how to structure that. So they've put a lot of resource into getting a feel for that. And then one of my smaller clients is they're very small and they're only doing very, very small projects. But they've had a similar approach. A lot of their work, the people do need to be there, but they've had a very sensible approach to the coronavirus. Like if someone was feeling sick, they said, look, you're sick, regardless, stay at home for 2 weeks, and they managed that as well. So this was a small company as well, and so they've got their staff they have 25 people on their staff. And so they were able to manage that and deal with that effectively from a cost perspective, because obviously there's a cost of doing that. But they approached it very sensibly, and the office staff, they did a transition, and again, for a small company to transition the staff to having the technology at home to do the work, or the office, the admin side of things, like you mentioned on your post this week, Julian, about taking care of the numbers. Those things still need to happen. And to have that interaction with the office from home, that was an expense for them. But they did that, they took that on board and they approached it. And the discussion was happening this week as to do they bring those office staff back yet? And they have the discussion with them as to whether they want to come back and how that will work. So there is a lot of discussions around that and finding that balance. And part of that, I always come back to Crocodile Dundee with one of these things. I love the story in the movie where the lady's talking about the psychologist, and he's like, what's a psychologist for? And she said, well, it's someone you talk to about your problems. And he said, well, yeah, we've got a Dunk for that. We tell Dunk our problem, he tells everyone else, and then there's no more problem. And I think having those conversations makes it better. And by talking to people, you gather that information, you're able to work out and it reduces some of that stress as well, because you realize that you're not alone. Other people are experiencing the same thing as you're experiencing.
Yeah, who doesn't love Crocodile Dundee? But yeah, I think you raise some good points there, Damien. And of course, the other thing is there's two things that bubble up, and this is talking to business owners in the street. clients of mine is the old school, call it the new school, and the trust factor. And, you know, it is a genuine question to be raised of, you know, when you're in an office, depending on your role, whether it's sales, marketing, finance, there is, you know, you go to work and you do work and you have meetings. And sure, you can walk around and get your coffee and have a 10-minute chat here and there, and can have a 15-minute meeting because there's ideas flying around, versus people working from home where they're not, you know, necessarily trusted, and, you know, that they are taking the business for a ride. I know of a very large multinational international insurance company. I knew someone who worked there, and they could work from home, and they had a system that if you didn't touch your laptop every 2 or 3 minutes, they would know that you know, it's laying idle. So they could tell if you're actually working, and you'd have to log in and off. And that was a global company that had those systems in place. So it brings up that question of trust, and we all like to trust our employees, and that's how you have to be. But, you know, how do you weed out the small minority that are wanting to stay at home for, let's say, the wrong reasons? And as a business owner, you want to give them that trust. You don't want to be calling them out. And if you do call someone out and you make a mistake, then you're going to damage your relationship with employees. So that's something that business owners are working through as we speak, you know, small, medium and large. Which also brings up, you know, technology, costs of Wi-Fi and all those things, that they need printers at home so they can print and scan. Minor details, but, you know, if you've got a workforce of 30 people working at home and you're a higher place and 20 of them say, I don't have a printer at home, do you then go out and spend, you know, $300 a printer times 20 to keep your staff at home because they only want to work at home 3 days a week? So these are all the things that businesses are working through. Is quite interesting.
And it will be a minefield, but I think if there are difficult conversations with people who were perceived as sliding slowly down the trust scale, then that was likely well and truly in place, and there were signs of that prior to this event, and probably I'd say go back there and tackle the conversation from that, not from your liberty and your ability to or inability to work at home. It's, you know, a different management conversation.
Well, that trust factor is interesting, and I have a different approach to how to manage those circumstances, especially to do with trust. And this came from when I was first working in the corporate environment, and I was always very dedicated. So when things went into my in-tray, I would get through that really quickly, and my in-tray had nothing in it most of the time, because as soon as I could put in my in-tray, I dealt with it, and I got in trouble because they're going, what work are you doing? And it was like, I quickly learnt to I had a stack of papers that were just random papers that sat in my in-tray to look like it was full. But that for me really spurred something in the sense of how I approach managing workflow. So, because it's easy to look busy, that doesn't mean you're productive. So the systems that I've put in place is set very specific objectives that people need to achieve. And from the teams that I've worked with, I really couldn't care less if they spent half the day drinking coffee, so long as they make that objective. Results. And they achieve the results. And that's what it's about. If someone can do something much more efficiently, well, that's great. And you work towards, I think there's an element of satisfaction of doing a good job. Whereas, you know, if you start to, I know myself, if I find myself, you know, lagging off or floundering around, it's not really motivating, and I find you don't get that sense of satisfaction. And I've found putting in place systems where people get that sense of satisfaction from the achievement as opposed from just doing effort, they perform much better, and then you don't have to worry so much about that trust because you've set clear objectives as to what you want them to achieve. That's the value that you're getting for paying them. And and then you don't have to worry about so what if they have coffee half the day? It doesn't matter. You're getting the results that you're paying them for.
I think this comes back to not just measures of how we look after ourselves and manage our workflows at home, but how we have conversations powerfully with other people. And it comes back to often comes back to I have an expectation and it's not properly communicated, and someone under or over, whatever it looks like, delivers against that, and I still haven't had a conversation, or that there hasn't been that conversation to go, actually my expectations are this. Go about it however you need to get there. If you've got issues, come to me. If you need something escalated or a problem removed, come to me. Otherwise, negotiate it on your own terms. And I think that it requires a certain level of not just self-awareness, but trust of others, trust that there are a million different ways of slicing a piece of cake and not everyone's going to do it the same way. And if you do want it done, very specifically for a specific reason, then you better sit down and work through that with the person or the team or whatever, the family.
Yeah, very much so. And I think just coming back to that earlier point, Ingrid, about that trust situation, and you're 100% right that people, if they were, call it untrustworthy, or you think they're cheating at home, they definitely had a problem before this virus hit us. They could probably fly under the radar a little bit amongst the busy bees at work. People can always make themselves look busy. And whereas now it's sort of like letting a lion out of the zoo. They go, wow, now I can really exploit this because I'm at home. And eventually those people, need to be removed from the organisation if they're just not performing. And secondly, as you said, Jamie said as well, setting clear objectives of what's expected. That's, at the end of the day, it's business is a results-driven sort of animal. So if your objectives are to do A, B, C, which then brings up the fact that, we started the conversation of people, are they working 12, 14-hour days as well? So you get the flip side of, possibly the small percentage that are cheating. And as a manager, to pull people up if you see them working at 9 o'clock at night, say, well, what are you doing? Oh, I'm just making this better. Well, no, that's called over perfectionism, and that's really good, but you're going to kill yourself at the same time. So there's a balance on either end of that discussion as well.
It's wonderful to see that does happen. Like the clients that I've worked for, and other companies that I've worked for as well when I've been an employee, they do have those policies of pulling people up and saying, hang on a minute, what you're doing is over and above. We appreciate it. However, you need to have this balance in your life. You need to make sure that you don't overstress yourself, because it's a long-term game we're playing here. You burn yourself out in 6 months. That's not going to be beneficial. We want you around for years as a valuable employee. So it's great to see that companies do pull people up and say, hey, there's a balance here. And then they take in, one of the companies I worked for, a construction company, New Zealand based, but based in Melbourne as well. They had regular get-togethers just for that wellness. They put number one was the mental focus of being in that good state of mind and mental well-being. So they had a lot of programs around supporting people with mental well-being. So it's great to see that people do that, or companies do that. So.
It'll be really interesting, and I'm not condoning this behaviour. I'm not one side or the other of it, but I suspect that there will be some cases that come up that are industrial relations related, and people who have actually been inefficient, ineffective, and not delivering prior to COVID that have lost their jobs through this time, feel like they've been managed out in the crisis rather than taking ownership of their delivery or lack of delivery. So that's going to be an interesting one to see.
And I really found that having that those objectives, and I've actually found that people that weren't so motivated, shall we say, by setting them clear objectives as to what you wanted them to achieve, things that they had to do. Sales is a great example of this. With sales, it's like, well, how many people did you call? And it's like, so this is the standard that you need to achieve. You need to make 60 cold calls a day, or whatever the number is. And then you have a check off, and as they say, what you inspect, people respect. But it's doing it in a way that's about achievement, as opposed to, you know, where a police state and monitor, you know, making sure you're doing it. If you do it from that perspective of this is the achievement that's expected, I've found that gets a lot better results than if you're actually, you know, doing it like we don't trust you. Because as soon as I know from my perspective, when I've been in that work environment, which I have been in a work environment where, you know, there was no trust there, it was just horrible. It just psychologically, it was not being trusted was a big issue, and I find, you know, approaching it from that perspective of these are the expectations that we have, and expecting people to live up to those expectations, as opposed to we're monitoring you because we don't trust you. They have very vast different results.
We might just try and bring it back, because we're nearly at the end, to the mission, which was to really delineate and try and learn and study yourself and your behaviours at home, as well as knowing you've just had a really intimate study of your family. So you should know what's going to be working and what isn't, not just from this immediate event, the worst of it hopefully past, but as you move forward, if you do end up staying at home and you do end up having family that need your attention as well during that time, break your work. Break it into chunks that are meaningful, that you can say, as Damien said, I'm going to do the next hour or 2 hours, whatever your inbox might look like. On email, I'm going to have a break, I'm going to have lunch with the kids, or whatever it looks like. Whatever's worked for you, it's going to hopefully work into your future, and all success.
And Julian, a takeaway from you?
I think it's like most things in life is getting that balance right of not working too hard, making sure you're not working too little, and that, you know, you are aware of the people around you. Let's come back to that family situation, that you don't dive in and become too you know, unaware of your social and family obligations, because it's so easy to do, and it just, you can pop your head up one day and you look around and they're gone, or they're just, you know, it's broken down, and then you've got a lot of work to fix that just because you had your head in the clouds, so to speak.
Yeah. And no guarantees of being able to. So
correct.
Yeah.
So it seems
Life's
to be
too short.
Exactly. It seems to be coming down to it's a choice. It's not whether you have if a rigid structure works for you, do that, or if you have a more flexible approach, do that. But actually making the choice of going, this is my work time, this is my family time, and setting things up in a way to do that, like you've done, Julian, with turning off the alerts on your emails, so you can just focus on what you need to focus on. Those little techniques allow you to, or even just leave the phone in another room. That makes a big difference as well. All right, thank you very much. This has been Exceptional Effort Business Sunday with Julian, Ingrid, and our absentee Pete, and I'm Damien Andrews. Thank you very much to everyone for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next week.
Okay, thanks guys.